listening to Give God 90, where we're not afraid of the tough biblical questions, because we will dig through the language, the culture, and the history to find the truth revealed in the words of our Creator.
Well, happy Monday, everyone, or whenever you happen to be listening. If you are listening live, the chat is open. If you want to leave a comment on the free Spreaker app, that's absolutely fine. I am being supervised closely this morning.
Good morning, everyone. It's great to be here with you today.
Oh, my. There's all kinds of good stuff going on in the world, isn't there? Before we get into all of that, let me remind you, if you like what you hear, those like buttons and share buttons work. Hit the notifications. All those things help other people find us a little easier. And I still have people say, well, how do I find you? Well, just search for Give God 90 on whatever podcast platform you're listening to. I think we're on just about all of them, whether it's Google, Apple, Spotify, iHeartRadio. Even on my channel on YouTube, you can get it. So it's there. If you've not been to Give God 90 for a while, you might want to do that. And don't forget, summer reading time is here. Sit out and enjoy the sunshine and read either Tradition to Truth. That should take you about 20 minutes. A little longer than that. But it is a pretty easy read, and it's for all ages. Something a little more detailed is God's Universe, God's Rules. And if you really want to get in depth and you really want to study, Inheriting Lies is for you. So there's my advertisement for the day. There's been a lot of interesting things in the news the last couple of days. One, I can't help but I've got to go here. A flat earth researcher has proven the earth is spherical. Unintentionally. Okay, the video's on YouTube if you want to look it up. It's kind of funny. Now, this experiment that I could have done for about $50, they spent $20,000 on. Oh my. And let's be realistic. If the earth was flat, okay, you can't have summer in the northern hemisphere and winter in the southern hemisphere at the same time. It wouldn't work that way. It just wouldn't work that way. There's, creation lends itself to telling us and teaching us that there is a creator. He designs things with certain blueprints, that he had, if we want to call him that. It just makes sense to call him that, in my opinion, because he does. He looks at, I can do this way, and here, I'll just speak it into existence. And it works because he did it. Something else out of Great Britain, an ordained minister and head of the Christian People's Alliance apparently has collected a substantial amount, and that's all they said. It was a substantial amount after being fired for expressing Christian beliefs. Maureen Martin was dismissed by the L&Q, a housing association employer, in 2022 after people complained about her hate speech. The speech is not hate speech at all, came in her expression of her Christian faith as part of her candidacy to be mayor of a London suburb. So that's going on. Anheuser-Busch announced that it is rebranding itself after losing an extremely substantial amount over the Bud Light debacle. The problem is with that, for some reason, Bud Light sponsored a pride parade where nude people rode bicycles down the street. But I am not able to verify or substantiate whether this came from Anheuser-Busch or whether it was a local distributor. nobody's saying. I have a feeling it was a local distributor because I don't think Anheuser-Busch is ready to lose any more money. It's just the way they operate. But when we look at some of these things, we have to realize that very quietly, very consistently, the Creator is pushing back evil. It's pushing it back into its hiding place. Even as Christians and even some Jewish folks all around the world are saying, "Oh, look at how terrible things are getting," and yeah, it is. But at the same time, as terrible as all of those things are, it's being pushed away. It's being subdued. So, with all of that going on, the really sad part is that some believers get confused. They see what's going on. They hear their worship leaders say one thing. They look at the news. They see something else. And, some of them go, well, it's just a conspiracy. It's just this. It's just that. And really, they don't know what to believe anymore. And is it any wonder? There's a phrase used in Acts 2:1 that tells the disciples, it tells us that the disciples, all over 100 of them at the time, were gathered together in one place, and they were all in one accord. And now what that means is they were all in agreement. Now, it's hard enough to get two people together in agreement, right? And you all know the old joke about if you have 12 rabbis in a room, you have at least 24 opinions, right? But think about the denominations we have today. And it doesn't matter whether they're Jewish denominations. It doesn't matter whether they're Christian denominations. Are they all in one accord? Absolutely not. All of them are different. There's Christian groups who won't go to a worship service for another denomination. There's Jewish groups who won't get together even with other Jewish folks, let alone other Christian people. Even though they claim, right? They claim, oh, we're all worshiping God. Really? You are, huh? How can they all be in agreement if they're all doing things differently? Doesn't make any sense, and it leads to confusion. Well, thankfully, there are individuals within these groups who are willing to say, let's just put our denominational and religious differences aside and just study the Bible. There's not a lot of them yet. They're growing in numbers, but they're out there. They're gaining popularity all over the world. And yet, so many believers, for lack of a better description, they're still confused as to what to believe. Now, I'm going to stick my neck out and say something. There's no need to be confused. There's no need for confusion or animosity among believers if, and that's a big if, right? Because we're talking about people. But if the individuals are willing to leave their religious and their denominational differences outside of these Bible studies, there's no need for confusion. There's no need for animosity. I've had the pleasure of studying with Orthodox rabbis, with Christian pastors, and I can say this. Some of them have a very, very difficult time turning off the filters with which they read the Bible. They have been taught all of their lives that, this, a certain verse, a certain passage, a certain word means something. Well, just because they've been taught that all their life doesn't mean that that's exactly what it means. Yeah. Myra has said this often. Just read the words.
That's right.
And still, we get questions like, which translation do you read? And I still give the same answers, the one that you will. Okay? Now, regular listeners know we read from various translations. And we don't do that to pick and choose. I do it to find the translation that most closely matches the original context of the text. Sometimes I have to retranslate for all of it. I think there's an example of that I think there's a couple of examples of that actually in Inheriting Lies. Do you realize there are over 100 Bible translations in English today? And each and every one pushes the agenda of either the translator or the editor. That's right. Each and every one has an agenda. So is it any wonder that some people just give up and say, oh, this is just too confusing. I'll never understand it. I'll never get it. Well, instead of giving up and saying, oh, I'll never get this, do something radical. Let's take the advice that Paul gives to Timothy. It's in his second letter. Study to show thyself approved is what, that's good advice, right? You study so that you can, by that action, you show yourself approved. But the verse goes on. A workman needs not be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. Now, when Paul writes this to Timothy, the four Gospels had not yet been written. What was Paul telling Timothy to study? The word of truth. Well, where's that found? How about Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy? Uh-oh. Christians, you have a problem. Because you don't like Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Most of you. I know because I hear it all the time. Well, that's the Old Testament. That isn't for us now. Myra's going to read a passage from the International Children's Bible because it actually simplifies what I'm talking about. Go ahead.
The Lord told Moses, you, Aaron, Nadab, and Abihu, and 70 of the elders of Israel must come up to me. You must worship me from a distance. Then Moses alone must come near me. The other men must not come near, and the rest of the people must not come up the mountain with Moses. So Moses told the people all the Lord's words and laws for living. Then all of the people answered out loud together. They said, we will do all the things that the Lord has said. So Moses wrote down all the words of the Lord. And he got up early the next morning. He built an altar near the bottom of the mountain. He set up 12 stones, 1 stone for each of the 12 tribes of Israel. Then Moses sent young Israelite men to offer whole burnt offerings. They also sacrificed young bulls as fellowship offerings to the Lord. Moses took the blood of these animals. He put half of it in bowls, and he sprinkled the other half of the blood on the altar. Then Moses took the book with the agreement written in it. He read it so the people could hear him, and they said, we will do everything that the Lord has said. We will obey. Exodus 24, 1 through 7.
Of course, that lasted about 20 minutes.
Maybe.
Now, if you'll notice, I have the passages that we've read come from 3 different translations so far. And the reason is, the one Myra read is pretty much a very simplified, very easy to read translation. The one out of King James, it's a little harder, but it's the most familiar probably. The other one from the Berean Study Bible, it was just a lot closer to the original. And I know, because I've been there and I've done this, that most Christians want to start studying the Bible with Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Some of them, just go right straight to John. And by the way, John is the most corrupt gospel in the Bible. It is the one that has had more things added and changed than any of the other letters. Basic information. Look it up. Well, I'm going to caution you against starting with Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John. You need to lay a good foundation before you try to put the roof on the house, right? If you've ever looked out there and watched construction from, groundwork up, it often takes much longer to do the groundwork to make sure everything's in place, make sure everything's level, flat, compacted the way it should be. And then you get to start, after all that's done, then you get to start putting the forms, pouring the concrete, laying the blocks, whatever you're going to do. Then you get to move on up and you get to start building, whether it's with wood or steel or stone or whatever it might be. Then you get to put on the roof. Now, for the folks that are out there trying to figure out Revelation, you can't decorate the inside of the house unless you have a good foundation. Because if you don't have a good foundation, that house might not stand long enough to put the roof on so that you can even get inside and decorate. For probably well over 30 years, I have experienced a typical Christian Bible study trying to understand the New Testament without having a strong foundation. It wasn't until I actually studied the Old Testament and then go back and look at the original language. That's when you actually start to begin to understand how the Almighty is putting all of the pieces together. You see, you have to be able to rightly divide the words of truth, the ones that Moses wrote, and actually do those before you can understand the basic premise. Not all prophecy is given in chronological order, and not every passage we read in the Bible is for every person on earth. Some passages are for men, some just for women, some for married people, some for single people, some for adult children, some for small children. And like Myra says, you have to read the words without trying to force them to mean something they don't mean. That's one of the premises. We dig through the language, the culture, and the history to find the words of truth. I don't limit myself to one translation, and I often don't stop at 2 or 3. I get back to the original, whenever I can. And more, I find myself going back to the original and going, what is he talking about? Because usually, especially if you're in either Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, he's referring back to something that he's written before. It's there. You just have to find it. You have to dig. And I have to go here again. I've mentioned this before. Christians, I'm going to tell you right now, Jesus did not carry his King James Bible to Bible school or to Sunday school. Didn't happen. I guess it's been about 30 years ago now, because we've been married, 32 years? There was a poster hanging in the basement of a church, and the artist had had drawn this picture, and it was, I kid you not, it was, a rendition of a young Jesus carrying his King James Bible to Sunday school. Now, the poster was for a Vacation Bible School promotion, okay? We wonder why we're still confused. It's because we confuse ourselves. We push our own agenda, we do different things, and we wonder, well, I can't get this. Just read the words. Even in English, most of the time, if you just read the words, you'll get it. There are some things that you're not going to get because they don't translate well. But most of the time, it works. Since I started doing whatever it is I do now, and that's kind of hard to explain to people, I've been speaking against most traditions and man-made doctrines because they have actually replaced the Creator's desired method of worship. I don't favor one religious system over another. I pick on them all. Y'all know that. Nobody's safe in my circle. And I do it to point out, not that you're wrong, but to point out where you can be right. Does that make sense? Okay, as long as that makes sense. Of all the people I've met, of all the people I've studied with, nobody has it 100% wrong and nobody has it 100% right. Not even me. I know that's hard to believe, but yes, I can be mistaken sometimes. Not often, but sometimes. And the reason I say not often is because, quite honestly, I dig. I don't like being wrong. I don't want to be wrong. And this is one of the things that when you're talking about biblical things, you don't really ever want to get it wrong. You go out and you hunt down the information, and not just what you agree with. You hunt down the information that disagrees with what you think, and then you find the places in Scripture, in the original context, in the original language, that either proves or disproves what you just looked through. When denominations or religions even push an agenda above the sacred word of the Creator, that, I can tell you, is wrong. You can't push your own doctrines. You can't push the man-made garbage above what the Almighty has already said. I don't care who you are. I don't care how much you think you have a desire to love God. Unless you're willing to change and do things His way, you're doing things your way. So here's a challenge for you. Get back to the basics. Get back to the fundamentals. The foundation of our faith. And that's what Give God 90 is there to help you for, right? You begin each day with prayer, and it doesn't need to be an hour of deep meditation, right? It needs to be an honest, open conversation. Then as you continue to build that relationship that so many believers say they want, you begin to study in earnest. And when you do that, I'm going to suggest going back to Genesis 1:1. Study for yourself what the words "in the beginning" actually mean. Figure out what the plural word of heaven means. And after all the foundation, for believers, in the beginning, right? That's the foundation. In the beginning, God, the Creator, the one who is before anything else. The one who is before anything else. Once you have that, then you can move on. But you need to know the one who made everything, and then you can begin to understand what he's done. Don't just read over the words. Read the words. It's time to end the confusion. And the way we end the confusion is by rightly dividing the word of truth, which is in the beginning of the book, not the middle of the book. So, hopefully that will help you in your, I'll never get this, and I don't know how many times I've heard that. It's just too hard to understand. It's not that hard to understand. It's Bible. It's not like you're trying to calculate, a mission to a foreign planet. It's getting to know the one that knows you best. So, did you have anything you wanted to add to all that?
Hope everyone has a good week, and we will see you back here on Thursday.
Absolutely. Until Thursday. Many, many blessings, everyone.